All right, in this part of the tutorial, we are going to cover all of the basic stitches that I use in my patterns. So once you're able to do everything that's on this board, you can complete any wooden embroidery pattern. So we have back stitch, which we've already done, stem stitch and chain stitch. Then we're going to do lazy daisy, colonial knot, and woven wheel. So before we get started, let's talk materials. I am using 6-strand embroidery floss. So this is DMC brand and it comes in these little skeins here. Then I'm using number 5 needles. So these are embroidery needles that have a wider eye. Let's see if it'll focus in. So it has a wider eye and it's still pretty thin. So this will allow us to thread the 6-strand floss. Then I have a sharp pair of embroidery snips. And this is it. So just make sure when you print this out that you score everything that has those lines, and even these words here have been scored. So the first thing we're going to do is this woven wheel. Whenever you see the woven wheel in a pattern, I highly suggest doing those first. You'll kind of see as we're doing the stitching that if there was already stitches in the holes next to it, it would make it a lot harder. So for the woven wheel, you need about 3 to 4 feet worth of floss. I am licking the floss and flattening it. Let me get the focus going here. And then let's see if I can get it through. Oh, they're almost all through. That is annoying. Okay, sometimes when it splits like that, go ahead and just cut it. Re-wet it. And there we go. All right, so I hold it firmly against this finger and then pull it all at once. So I pull this about halfway through and then leave the rest. All right, so woven wheel time. We're going to do this bottom one and we come up through the center. That is not. Okay, Liz, there we go. So come up through the center here and down through any one of these spokes. So once you do this first stitch, just like on the back stitch, go ahead and tie it off. And snip any extra. Okay, now that we are back, we're gonna just go through and make sure every one of these spokes is connected to the center. So there's no rhyme or reason, you can just do it in whatever order you want. And I'm not pulling incredibly tight. I'm not leaving them super loose either. It's kind of a good in-between. Because you're going to be using these for weaving. You don't want them to be incredibly tight. Okay, let's get focused here. All right. So now that we have all of our spokes, we're going to come up one more time through the center and start our weaving. So you can start wherever. I'll start here. So we're going to go over this and then under this one. And I kind of twist as I go. So we did under, so now we're going to go over the next and under the following. We're going to go over this one, under the next. Over, under. So I'm pulling decently tight at the beginning, but then as you kind of fill up the circle, you can be a little bit more loose. So you can also see here, if I had stitches going through right here, it would just make pulling the needle under a little bit hard. So as we're nearing the end, I am just very gently pulling. What you want to do is fill it up so that it covers the holes as much as possible. So in order to do that, you just loosely, you can use your finger to kind of pull the thread over that hole. I just like when it's hidden. So we're going to go around probably 2 more times, and then we will have enough thread to cover all the holes. All right, we're looking good. So I'm going to call this one finished. And again, you can kind of use your finger to fluff it out a little bit. You can also fluff out the center. You can do that with your needle. And then once you feel happy with it, go ahead and go back down through the next hole. All right, now that we've done woven wheel, I'm actually going to work backwards, and we're going to start with these stem stitches because in order to move on to these other ones, we're going to need to first do their stems. Okay, so here we are at the back stitch. We are going to come up through the second hole and go back down through the first. So at this point, you can either tie the string to itself or to another thread, or you can just hold it, but I'm going to tie it off to itself. And then trim the excess. All right, so back stitch is you come up through the next open hole, and then you go back down through the previous hole. So up through the next open, back down through the previous. All right, now that we are finished with the back stitch, we're going to go ahead and tie it off. So I do this by going underneath a previous stitch, creating a loop, bringing my needle through the loop, pulling it tight, and doing it one more time. So, lost the needle, go underneath a stitch, create a loop, go through the loop. And that is a knot. So the stem stitch is the reverse of a back stitch. So as you can see here, this is a very messy stem stitch, but it has kind of like a curved look to it. So that's what's going to be our final look for the stem stitch. So the first stitch of a stem stitch is different than the rest. So we're going to come up through the first hole, and then we're going to skip one and go down through the second. So this is unique. We're not going to skip at any other time, just for the first hole. So I'm not going to tie off in the back. I'm going to hold it with a finger, and then I'm going to also make sure there's this loop, because what we're going to do is come back up through that hole between the loop. And now you can pull it tight. So I'm always going to kind of have my thumb here in order to keep the string on this side of the line. So now we're going to come, we're going to go down through the next open hole. So now we're back on to kind of like a back stitch rhythm. Down through the open hole and up through the previous. But as I'm coming up, I'm making sure that the loop is on the same side. And that's it. So now I'm going to hold that. We're going to go down through the next open, hold that taut, and we're going to go up through the previous. So you can see there, we're kind of creating a little braided look. So hold that there, down through the next open, up through the previous. And you can pull it taut. And look at the back here. The back is turning out to be a stem stitch, or a back stitch. So this truly is the reverse. All right, when you reach the end of a stem stitch, because there's not the next open one to go through, I usually will just finish off by going back down through the last hole. The last open hole. There we go. All right, so when would you use a stem stitch? I don't actually call for this in my patterns, but it's just a matter of preference. If you're doing a backstitch pattern and you prefer this more braided look, you can just swap them out. So this is a pro because I feel like it covers the holes a lot better than the backstitch, but I usually just stick with the backstitch because that's the most simple to explain. So feel free to swap the stem and the backstitch. They can be interchangeable. All right, now we're going to do the chain stitch, and I don't have this in any of my patterns yet, but it will be in some future patterns. I don't know if you've seen any of those kids' sweatshirts with names embroidered on them. It's done a lot of times in a chain stitch, which has been really popular lately, so I'm excited to incorporate that more into my patterns. So to begin with this stitch, we're going to come up through the first hole here. And then we are going to actually go back down through that same hole while holding the thread. So we're trying to create a loop. All right, so we have this loop created, and we're going to kind of stretch it over that second open hole. So we're going to come back up through that hole and up through the loop. So pull it tight, not incredibly tight, because we're going to go back down through that same hole. So holding the thread, we're going to go back down through the hole you just came up, make a loop that goes over the next hole, and that's where you're going to come up. And that is the chain stitch. You just go down through the hole you just came up, create a loop, put it over the next open hole. Don't poke yourself, come back up through there and pull it somewhat tight, not incredibly tight. So something got caught on the back side. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay, this is a good lesson. Remember when you did those little crochet things as a kid, those crochet chains? It was literally with this chain stitch. And if you pulled on it, it would all come out. So let's see, how am I going to recover? You know what? I think this might call for a restart. Something got snagged, so we're just going to cut it here and try again. All right, to finish this one off, you want to make sure when you go back down through that same hole that you actually come on the outside of the thread. So don't go back down through the chain loop. Go back down through the outside of it, and that will finish it off. So you could substitute the chain stitch for either of these other two stitches if you'd like. I think really the only thing to keep in mind is just to make sure that you don't have too many other elements that would crowd it on either side. But I think this would be a great alternative if you just wanted a different look to some of the embroidery pieces. All right, now we're going to do the lazy daisy stitch. And the reason we did these first was because you're going to need to first do the stem. So we're going to actually do the back stitch all the way up through the stem, and then we're going to start our first lazy daisy. All right, now that we reached the end of the stem, we're going to do pretty actually similar to the chain stitch in a lot of ways. We're going to go ahead and come up through that last hole here. Not that one. There we go. So come up through this hole, and we're going to create our first leaf shape right here. So to do that, we're going to hold it with our thumb and go back down through that same hole to create the loop. So now we're going to come up through that top flower hole and bring your needle through the loop. So just how we finished off the chain stitch, we are just going to do that to every single one of these leaves. So we're going to go back down through that same hole on the outside of the loop. And that creates this cute little flower petal, or in this case, leaf. So what we want to make sure to do here, there's a couple things. One, don't pull the loop too tight because it looks best when there is some looseness to it, so it has a more rounded shape. Let's see, the other things are more troubleshooting, so let's see if they happen as I'm stitching. Okay, this is just something I do from muscle memory, but as I go down through the hole on the outside of the loop, so here's that loop, I hold everything with this thumb because since these holes are so small, a lot of times, it's not happening here, but a lot of times on the back, it will actually snag another thread. So if you just hold everything with your thumb on the front side, then it won't disturb the leaf shape at all. So let's see if it'll happen here. Sometimes when there's just multiple threads going through the same hole, they do get snagged. Whoop. So we're holding this to create a loop. We're coming up through the end hole here. We're pulling tight, but not too tight, just so we can make sure to have the shape of that petal. And then I'm holding everything with my thumb as I go back down on the outside of the loop. So no snags, I'm glad for that. But even if we did have a snag, then everything would stay uniform. All right, so I'm coming up through the center. So you'll see here, every center stem hole is gonna have 2 leaves coming out of it. So we come up through the loop. Go back down on the outside. And I kind of turn as I go just to orient myself and not have to feel like I have to like move my hands in a weird way. Okay. Okay, it's a little bit harder to see here, but when I pulled the string down, can you kind of see how it got a little snaggy, or it's like, oh my goodness, that's hard to see, but, oh, here we go. It is a little, some like extra loops have been left. So that just means part of your string, part of the 6 strands got pulled tighter than the other part. So go ahead and hold on with your thumb to everything else. And then on the back side, I just kind of like gently do this. And there, that fixed it. So now when we look at it, it doesn't have anything sticking up. And you can kind of wiggle the flower shape back, or the petal shape back. All right, I'm going to finish the last of this Lazy Daisy, and then before we go and do these colonial knots, let's go ahead and finish our woven wheels if you haven't already, just so that it makes life easier before we have other stitches going on here. So now that I've gone and done the back stitch all the way up through the stem, we're going to start with colonial knots. And these are hard to start out with if your string isn't knotted yet. So we're going to actually go through, just come under any one of the completed threads already and go ahead and tie off now. All right, so now that our thread is secured, we're gonna come up, we're gonna start with this like cluster of a flower right here. So we're gonna come up through the stem hole, and then we're going to make sure to loop the thread over your needle. So to make this a little bit more clear, here we go, we'll tighten it. So as you can see, the thread is looped over the needle and I'm securing it with my pointer finger. So then I'm going to cross over the thread and bring it over the needle again. So if you can see that, here is what that looks like. So I'm holding everything secure with my pointer finger, and then we're going to go back down through that same hole. So as I do this with this hand, my left hand, I'm going to pull a little bit tighter on the thread. Not too tight that it's really snug against the needle, but just enough so that there's no looseness. So what we're going to do is pull the thread through the hole. All the while, I'm not letting go with my left hand. So pull it all the way till we are right here. And you should be able to pull nice and tight through the back and have nothing slip through. So let's do that a few more times. So we're going to come up through any one of these other holes. And then I'm going to loop the thread over the needle just like this. Then with your other hand, take the thread and go over the needle this way. Hold it secure. Pull it nice and tight. Come down and pull it. All right, so another one is nice and secure. Now we're going to come up through any one of these other holes, making sure I like to kind of stick together so that none of them get hidden. But we're going to loop it over. There we go, hold it. With your other hand, loop again. Pull it taut, push it through. There we go. So we're going to continue to do this on each one of these clusters until it is all filled up. Okay, I think we are finished here, mainly because that looks nice and round to me. So let's go ahead and work on the neighboring just little trio here. These are easier to see, but has like a nice little berry look to the end. There we go. So you see, sometimes I really have to like pull it through at first, but if the knot is done right, then there shouldn't be any snags. So like right here, I have to kind of just pull it in one swift motion, and there we go. So sometimes it gets a little bit loose on the front end, so don't feel too scared to pull it as tight as you want. Now obviously if you yank hard enough it'll pull through, but oh, just like that. So I pulled a little too hard. So if that happens, what I like to do is take the end, so there's the pointy side, take the end of the needle and just kind of push it back up again. Okay, or just come grab it. All right, if neither of those work, then just go ahead and pop it on through and start over. All right, so go ahead and do this enough times to get some good practice in, and then you will have completed your sampler. So now that the sampler is completed, you can confidently do any of my embroidery patterns. Yay, you did it! You now can embroider every pattern I have available in my store. So if you're interested in giving some a try, you can feel free to search. I have everything organized by type of embroidery, and hopefully you'd find something there that looks like fun to try. If you haven't already, I'd love to invite you to join my free file club. I give away 2 free files every month, and we'll occasionally have some embroidery patterns that I'll be giving away there. So if that interests you, you can join at bellacollective.com. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. Feel free to follow bella.collective, and feel free to reach out via DM if you have any questions or need some help on embroidery projects. I would love to be a resource for you. All right, I am off to finish my collection of new Christmas embroidery patterns. So hopefully by the time this airs, those will be available in my store, and you can find them there if you want some fun Christmas projects.